there, everybody. Good morning. It's Jessie from Jessie Marie Does Stuff here on FlossTube, and I am here finally with my Heaven and Earth Designs demonstration in sort of a walkthrough on how I do things and why. So I have a few things to show you here today. We're starting off with this blank table so that I can show you the way in which I work a Heaven and Earth Designs page. And then I will talk about how I start and stop my threads. And then I'm going to work over here on Personal Sunshine for a little bit. And Personal Sunshine, you will see a preview of what this is supposed to look like finished. I have a little under 2,000 stitches left to go on this first page. So, yeah. Okay, so Heaven and Earth Designs. First things first is how do I tackle a page? For this demo, I was going to print off a page from one of the freebie Heaven and Earth Designs, but just in case HAED decides to remove those charts from their freebie chart tab on their website and decides to only have them up for sale, I thought that just to make sure everything is copacetic, I just went with this blank grid and it will serve our purposes just fine. So when I first started doing Heaven and Earth Designs, the only logical way that I knew how to do it was to start at the top of a column and work my way down. And so I would do this block and this block and this block. And then I would stay within the confines of that box. So if there was a color that stretched out, I ignored it. I only did what was in this block. Then I started to notice some column lines, and I'm going to insert some pictures here of Mini Pearl where you can see those column lines, where you can see that the tension really warped the fabric. So I changed up my method and I started to do this column, and then if there was a color here that carried over, then I stitched it as far as this edge. So in other words, I could be working 20 stitches in a row. Let me draw this down here so that you can see it. So upwards of this column here. But I would still stop there. And that worked out pretty well for a while. Now I will admit that there was still some column lines. I was still having some issues with these column lines, but they weren't as severe as when I was doing block with those harsh edges. So next, let me see here. What was the next process? So then Heaven and Earth Designs had a challenge, and the challenge was to stitch this block and then this block and then this block. So essentially going horizontally, whereas I was traditionally going vertically. And I liked this because it prevented those column lines in a way that I wasn't expecting. Because what I would do is I would stitch, I'm going all over this graph here. I would stitch this block, and then if there were colors that carried over, then I would stitch them as far as they carried over. So potentially 40 stitches. The chart that I was working on was very heavily blocks of color, and so there was a lot of that going on. So essentially that sort of, it's called feathering, where you carry it beyond the edges of the block. That really helped prevent those column lines. Now, here's a consequence to this, and it's based on how I start and stop my threads. So I would stitch this block. Again, going all over. Can you see that? Yes. Okay. So I would stitch this block. And then, in order to stitch this block, I had to flip my work over, clip the threads that were here, and then stitch this block. And then I would have to do the same thing. Flip my work over, clip the threads, flip back, and then stitch this block. I don't know about you guys, but I don't like flipping my work. I don't like flipping to the back. Uh, it takes time. And when I was working these columns, I would work a whole column and then flip, clip the threads, and move on. But with this, I was having to do it every roughly 100 stitches. And that got really annoying really fast. So I changed up my methods. And I'm just going to turn this sideways and we're going to roll with it. So here's what I'm doing now. I would stitch this block. Let's say this is the top corner of my page. So this is the page 1 right here is the very start, okay? Then I would have to flip to the back, clip those threads, and then stitch this block. And then I'd come down here and stitch this block. And then I'd come up over here, flip to the back, clip the threads, and then come up over here, stitch this block, and then this block, and then this block. So now I'm stitching 3 whole blocks before I have to flip over to the back to clip those threads, and I get reduced column lines. And I am noticing that I'm having reduced column lines. Some of the column lines I think will wash out, like I've said, so I'm not too concerned about them, but I want to try to reduce that as much as possible. So that's that. So I'm essentially working in diagonal blocks. This block, then these 2, then these 3. And eventually it gets down to, I believe that the longest block, the longest diagonal on a standard size Heaven and Earth Designs page is 7 blocks. So I can get going pretty good because I only have to flip to the back if I absolutely have to. Okay, now let's switch over and talk about how I start and stop threads, because I know you're all wondering, okay, well, Jess, if you have to clip threads, like, why aren't you catching it in the back? And how are you doing this without clipping threads? Okay, so I work in what I would consider 3 columns at a time. I have my stitching column. I have my we'll call this the feathering column. So this is the column in which I may feather into. And then we have my parking or thread starter column. Okay, so I labeled it P, but it's really where my threads are started. Okay, so what I will do is I'll place the thread here, run it under the back, leave a little tail up here, and then use it to start stitching this block. If I need to, I can feather over. But by and large, this block is used for those thread tails. So let me see if I have an example. I have an example here in my stitching. I'm not going to use my highlighter for that. Yes, I will. Just put the cap on so I don't draw on it. Okay, so you see these threads here? So this thread right here was placed here, carried under, and used to stitch this block in here. Now this page wasn't gridded because I had used this page for a Heaven and Earth Designs challenge that was those the checkerboard, and so I didn't need to grid this page. So this thread was brought in over here for this block here, which is the second to last column. And I used it to stitch with. When that thread ran out, I would run it under over here. I didn't have to run it under any stitches. I would just pull up at that spot. Okay, now how do I make that happen? Okay, so I'm going to draw a big X. And here's how I do my X's. So these are the 4 holes of a stitch. We'll pretend this is an exaggerated stitch. So I come up from the bottom left, go down at top right. Then I come up from bottom right down at top left. Okay, so essentially on the back, what you see is this and then this. Okay, so I will place my thread here. I place my thread here along the same row of holes as the bottom, as the come up portions of my stitch. I come over here, pull my needle through the fabric here, come down here. Now, when I come up here, what I always do is drag my needle up the back of the fabric, and you'll see this here in just a minute, but I drag my needle up the back of the fabric, which inevitably catches that tail. You see right there? Catches that tail, and then I'm good to go. Okay, so on the back side, what this looks like is this thread comes up here. I use it, I make my X on the front, come down, this thread catches it on its own, and then make the other leg of the X on the back and come down. Does that make sense? I hope that that's making sense. So essentially, I am letting my thread catch it on the back on its own. Okay, now for ending threads, the same principle applies. So I have a thread that I am running out of. I don't have enough stitches left in this thread, so I need to start a new one. So I make my last X. I make my last X as far to the left of the block as I possibly can, because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this X, and then this thread right here, yes, this thread right here, I'm going to pull up here. You guys can't see that. Okay. So I made this last X here. I bring it all the way down and pull it up there. Okay. So now when I come in and do my next X's, I'm going to add in another thread, and then I catch. What ends up happening is I end up catching both of these on the back. So both of them are trapped by this one X. And because I did this X as far to the left as possible, then I have up to 9 stitches here that could potentially catch those tails. Okay, I hope that that's making sense. It might not be. So that is essentially how I start and stop threads and how I tackle a page. And I am going to show you this in action. Okay, so what you see here, I'm about ready to start stitching. I've got my needle loaded with my next thread. This thread right here corresponds to this stitch right here. That one right there. So essentially, this is the ending tail, and it's a little bit loose right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the hole just behind it. And I'm going to bring it up, as I said, bottom right, or bottom left, excuse me, down at top right. Now here's the important part. I tug on these tails, and then I drag my needle along the back. And here's how I know it works. When I give it a tug, it doesn't move. It doesn't slip out. Okay, so I've done a few stitches here. I'm going to flip to the back. I don't normally do this. I don't flip to the back to check because I've gotten pretty confident that things do what they are supposed to do. But let me go ahead and do that. Flip to the back here. And so what you can see is that they are both trapped right in there. They're both caught in there. Maybe you can see that, maybe you can't. But they are indeed both trapped in there. So we are good to go. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch for a little bit. You guys are welcome to stitch with me. It's going to be very boring because these next two blocks are solid black. This block that I'm working in here, and then this one down here. But I'm just going to stitch, and we'll see